My guest today is Kevork Almassian, an award-winning journalist, Syrian by birth and background, but no longer living in that country. Kevork has his own channel, Syriana Analysis, which I personally regard as a must-have, must-see resource for up-to-date information, not just about Syria, but the wider world, and certainly the wider Middle East. His voice is one I have found personally helpful when it comes to trying to understand Syria and the Middle East. And I would say also I regard his as an important voice, one of few offering a perspective different from what most of Western mainstream media offers. It's lovely to see you, Kevork. Thank you for making time.
I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm humbled by your kind words about my work, because this is the fuel that always keeps me energetic and motivated to create content and speak to people, speak to the webcam basically, but communicating with the people and trying to deliver a message.
Good. And long may that sense of optimism and determination on your part continue. I felt one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you today, I feel that after all the heat and the focus that was on Syria for a relatively short while as the Assad regime was swept away, that Syria has dropped away from the attention of, I would say, most people in the West, as the circus has moved on to the next town, to the next story. So I wonder if you could endeavour to bring us up to date with Syria today.
Actually, when we follow the mainstream press during the operations, let's say, of the HTS, we were informed that this is a revolution against the tyrant. And I would like to mention that what happened in Syria was a regime change war, complete regime change war in all its forms, with the foreign intelligence backing, and they had to get rid of Assad. Now we put this chapter away. We have a new situation in Syria. I was watching on Thursday the testimony during the Senate hearing of many important politicians, and during this time we have heard for the first time from Tulsi Gabbard. She mentioned this directly, that an Al-Qaeda offshoot is now in power in Damascus, and she mentioned about her trip to Syria, because she visited Syria, I believe, in 2014, and she was criticized for it. And she was called an Assadist, she was called a Russian agent, etc. And she said, I have no love for Assad, I don't love dictators, but I despise Al-Qaeda. And I think there has to be a consensus about Al-Qaeda. What is Al-Qaeda? It's a Takfiri group. The Takfiri group, basically, they judge individuals and the groups, other ethnic groups and religions, based on the religion and the ethnicity that they have been born in. And HTS is basically, which is in power now in Syria, they are the rebranding version of Al-Nusra Fund. Al-Nusra Fund operated in Syria between 2012 to around 17, 18, and then they changed their name into HTS. However, the leader of Al-Nusra Fund, who started the movement in Syria, the Al-Qaeda offshoot, was Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, or his real name is Ahmad al-Shara. And after rebranding, he continued leading the HTS group, which is now in power, and therefore the president of Syria today is the founder of the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria. And Abu Muhammad al-Jolani was in Iraq in 2003, and not to fight against the occupation of the US or the UK, but rather to join Al-Qaeda. And he sent countless number of car bombs to the Shia, for example, neighborhoods, in order to start a civil war there. So he was on the radar of the US for a quite long time. And then he ended up in the Bucha CIA camp alongside Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And then both of them were released in 2011. One of them formed ISIS and the other one formed the Al-Nusra Fund. Both of them were part in the same so-called Islamic State movement. And then they separated due to political differences among them. So we have now the Al-Qaeda offshoot is in power in Syria. So what do we expect from them? Do we expect them to build a civil state? Do we expect them to respect, let's say, the rights of the people, regardless of their background, ethnic background or religious background? No, that's illogical. So once they come to power, they started to let's put it between bracket, Islamize the country. So they change the curriculum. They remove the evolution theory, for example, from the books. And they say that women cannot become judges in Syria because a woman is not doesn't have the full intellectual capacity of a man to become a judge, according to them, of course. And they started persecuting some of the minorities in Syria. And I would like to mention this because this is very important since the press is no longer shedding light on the situation in Syria. The main persecution in Syria is against the Alawites. The Alawites are a small offshoot in Islam. They are more progressive and they also believe in some philosophical teachings in their religion. Most of the women do not cover their heads. They drink alcohol, etc. And President Assad, the former head of the state, was from this Alawite sect. So they came to power and they say we're going to take revenge against the Alawites because the president was from this sect. So what they're basically doing in different cities, they are coming after people claiming that they are regime remnants and they are committing summary executions in the streets. Around 200 people were summary executed in the streets. And all the videos are there. We can verify them. And the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is led by a notorious anti-Assad figure. So his credibility is like he was against the former regime. And at the current moment, he's still reporting on the human rights abuses in the country. He says that there are targeted attacks against the Alawite communities and revengeful acts and also sectarian motivated violence, which led to the big influx of the people leaving their towns and villages into other cities. But this is, in my opinion, deliberate, because when you start committing sectarian motivated violence against certain religions and ethnicities in the country, you're pushing them into cantons. So every religion and every sect goes into certain geographical area and they try to protect themselves. And under Assad, this was a different situation because under Assad, it was more secular authoritarian system. Now we have a theocratic authoritarian system. So under Assad, people enjoyed religious and cultural freedoms. Unlike the political freedoms, under Assad regime, the people were free to practice their rituals and their religions, etc. Now under HTS is more, this is in jeopardy. And Christians and Alawites and Shiites feel they are discriminated against, not in major cities like in Aleppo and Damascus, because all the press is there, but in smaller towns and smaller, let's say, cities like in Homs and in Hama and in Latakia, this sectarian violence is still ongoing up until this moment.
Kevork, I listened carefully to the BBC, for example, coming out of Britain, in the immediate aftermath of the fall or the sweeping away of the Assad regime. And it was all very upbeat about, and speaking to Christians and speaking to people representing minority faiths, all very upbeat and optimistic about a new dawn, freedom from Assad tyranny, and people being, loudly hopeful. And now, and I would say, as I said at the beginning, that a lot of attention, mainstream attention, has drifted away. That was then, and Syria has become yesterday's news to a great extent. How does that sit? With the picture that you're describing, why would you say that the mainstream media in the West is just no longer paying attention when it mattered so much, apparently, to report that Assad was gone?
This was a 14 years project. So once the, let's say, the regime change happened, they had to celebrate and to give the impression that everybody is happy. Of course, there were many people happy for the removal of Assad and they celebrated in the streets. But there is a saying in Arabic, like, or you can't basically fix a problem and create more problems, right? If the solutions are worse than the problem itself, then we are in a more difficult situation in the country. Now, there were people, also Christians and Alawites and others, they were hopeful that HDS would act in a let's say, civilized manner. So that's why they also participated in the celebrations, to give the impression that we are also on your side. You're now the state, you rule the country, and we would like to be treated equally. So people went to the streets, celebrated for a week or two. But then when the time of the parties was over, then this is the time of reality. Now you see that they are executing or implementing new laws in the country. What Jolani did, basically, he first he appointed himself as the president of the country without elections. He canceled the constitution. He canceled the People's Assembly, which means the parliament, and he canceled the prime ministry and the cabinet, and also the military and the police. So basically, he appointed himself as the Tsar of the country for the next 4 years, and he's not responsible for the parliament. He's not responsible in front of the government. Nobody can question him. And there is no national army to serve the interests of the people, but rather only a police which belongs to him himself. So from now to 4 years, it's a very long time to create a status quo on the ground under which you can hold elections in the future, but after you already have a strong grip over every state institution, and especially the education system, the curriculum, as we mentioned, and also very, very importantly, the press, which you can tell the people what is right and what is wrong. And most importantly, also in Syria, it's the Ministry of Endowment, which means the ministry which cares about the religious affairs. So they are changing even the nature of the country from a secular pan-Arabist country into what they call an Islamic nature of a state. So this will definitely create a backlash in a country which is multicultural and multi-religious, under which 30% of the people belong to different minority sects and religions. So if you're going to present a country for only 70%, the rest of the 30% will be alienated under such circumstances.
Also in the immediate aftermath, we heard much about the fact that Israeli forces were occupying a considerable patch of Syrian territory. I heard figures suggesting that Israeli forces were within 20 or 30 miles of Damascus. That Israel and others had worked very quickly to destroy Syrian Air Force and other military capability. Now, what's the situation now with that sitting alongside the presence in Damascus and with his hand on all of the levers of power of somebody who we would have been invited to think was a mortal enemy of Israel?
And you notice that the press never speaks about this case. And Israel basically is now 19 kilometers away from the capital of Syria. And they have occupied all the high hills, the Mount Hermon, and the highest peak in Syria and Israel and Palestine and Lebanon used to exist in Syria. Now Israel has its hand over it. So logistically, intelligence, on an intelligence level and militarily, they now enjoy superiority over 3 regions. Also, Israel occupied the water resources in the south of Syria. So now Israel has military superiority, and it holds the water supplies of the people in their hands. And previously, in 1967, they have already occupied the Golan Heights. So now this is a new swath of territories, let's say, being annexed to Israel. And the officials in Israel, including the defense minister, say they will not withdraw from these territories. This is going to be permanently part of Israel. And in this case, I think Turkey and Israel were on the same side. They both had the end goal in mind, which is a regime change in Syria. Assad was an enemy both for Erdogan and for Israel. But after the regime change, there are also different interests in Israel and in Turkey. Like in Turkey, they want for HTS to have a full control over the country. Meanwhile, Israel wants for the Kurds to have their own autonomy in the east of Syria, and at the same time wants for the Druze minority to have their own entity as well, and to open a corridor between the Golan Heights and the newly occupied territories by Israel into these regions in order to have a free communication between these two components of the Syrian society, the Kurds and the Druze. But this is not what Turkey wants in this case. So this is a recipe, again, for more conflict in the country. And we will see sooner or later that these two sides may have a conflict of interest. And it would be interesting to see how Donald Trump would try to solve this, because now that, as I mentioned, Tulsi Gabbard, clearly for the first time officially somebody comes and says that Jake Sullivan in 2012, under President Biden, he was the national security advisor, and back then he was the employee for Hillary Clinton, and he sent an email to Hillary Clinton telling her, quote, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And she mentioned this during the Senate hearing. So, and she says that we brought basically this Al-Qaeda offshoot to power. Will Trump tolerate that? That's a different question. If I'm being asked about this, I think this is a horrible mistake to install an Al-Qaeda offshoot in power in Syria, because Syria is one of the birthplace of the civilizations, human civilizations. And passing through Syria, there have been multiple civilizations that have spread around the world, including in Europe, in Turkey, in the Middle East, in North Africa. So Syria has a very important geopolitical position. And if the Al-Qaeda offshoot rule is normalized, this could be copied into other regions. This could motivate the radical elements in other countries in the region to say that, look, the message is clear from Syria that if you want to be politically relevant, then you have to join one of these radical groups in order to come to power. Because, look, in Saudi Arabia, there is no democracy. In the UAE, there is no democracy. In Bahrain, there is no democracy. Jordan, all these countries are not democratic countries. They are kingdoms. So if the youth in these countries feel alienated and say we want to be part of the power structures, so what kind of message have the West, Turkey and Israel have sent to the people in the region? That in order to get rid of these tyrants in your countries, you must join to a group that resonates with the ideas of Al-Qaeda, and then we will support you and endorse the rule. That's the real problem, that EU officials, British officials, American officials all met with Al-Jolani and they gave him their green light.
What happens then? How would you predict that new president of Syria would behave and respond to the situation in which he finds himself, or perhaps into which he has been placed, which is to say the meshing teeth of two naturally opposed powers, being Turkey and then Israel, which is basically Israel and America together. How does he seek to survive within those meshing teeth of those two powers?
This is a very important question. And when I was asked after one day after regime change, I said this was Erdogan rushing to finish the job in Syria via unleashing the HDS militants, basically 40,000 of them, because he knew that Trump is coming to power. And in a matter of few weeks, and when Trump comes to power, he will impose certain compromises on the region, one of which is in Syria. And they were speaking, J.D. Vance spoke, RFK spoke, and Trump also mentioned that they have intentions to withdraw from Syria. And so the Turkish side, they wanted to have a better position on the negotiation table before Trump comes to power. So I think that in this case, Trump now comes to the presidency, but there are new realities in Syria. Were it not for the regime change, he may have imposed a certain compromise. But now Turkey is the major player in Syria. The number one victor of this conflict is Turkey and Qatar. And the Republicans in the US, they're not in good terms with the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region, especially Turkey, Qatar. Unlike the Democrats love the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region, and especially in Doha and in Ankara. They are the ones who brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Tunisia and Egypt and tried to bring them also in Syria. So under Trump, once he comes, I don't think he has the capacity or the willingness to send troops to Syria, because they already have 2,000 troops, but that's really a small number of troops if they want to counter the Turkish hegemony in the region. So what are they going to do? They have few options. One is to leave Syria for Turkey, or most of it. Two, to empower the Kurdish militias to create a clash with the Turkish side, and this will be very bloody for the Syrians, for the Turks, for the Kurds, for everyone. Or they will encourage the Balkanization of Syria, which means Jolani continues occupying Aleppo, Idlib, Homs, Hama, and Damascus. And then Israel advances more and creates a buffer zone in the south and opens a corridor to Sueda, which means that Sueda and the Druze will have their own autonomy or their own state, mini-state. And the same goes for the Kurds and for the Alawites. Christians would be already living with the Alawites because they are closer to each other. So there are three scenarios in this. Which one will Trump choose? I don't think that Trump has an appetite to send more troops and be in a confrontational mood with Turkey in this case. Turkey is also a very important player, and they need Turkey. Look, they don't like Turkey much, but they need Turkey to execute certain roles in the region, one of which is also like in Ukraine. Turkey is trying to have a balanced relationship between NATO and Russia and the BRICS, for example, because they can bear the fruits of this relationship with both sides. He's playing smart with both sides. But at the end of the day, if the Americans have an appetite to subjugate, let's say, Erdogan, they can. But they don't have an interest at the current moment to go tete-a-tete against Erdogan. They can empower his enemies in the region, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, because the Saudis and the Emiratis are freaked out by this regime change. Because once these Muslim Brotherhood groups come to power, their opposition in their own countries are also Muslim Brotherhood. And they know that Turkey and Qatar are ready to play this role to destabilize their own countries.
What happens in that context? There's so many questions coming to mind based on what you're saying. But for example, the Abraham Accords, which had, whether you were for the Abraham Accords or against the Abraham Accords, that had been a kind of a slowly rising tide. That water was insinuating its way wider and wider within that area. Whether you were for it or not. What future now, given how much was invested by Saudi Arabia and others, in normalizing relations with Israel, let's say, when suddenly, so much, red hot chili powder has been thrown over a volatile place like Syria?
I just want to give just a small context. Like in the 90s, the Americans started the Madrid negotiations and also the Oslo Accords. And they believe that if they can bring both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis together, they could reach to some compromise or solution. But under Trump, this strategy has been completely reversed. Now, the Palestinians, they're not even part of any of these agreements. They're basically dealing with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and Egypt and Jordan without dealing with the Palestinians, because Trump reversed this strategy of a two-state solution into one-state solution. They don't want to give the Palestinian statehood. And Trump nowadays says that Egypt has to receive 2 million refugees from Gaza and Jordan should receive the 1.5 million from the West Bank. So the strategy is to push as many Palestinians away and uproot them from their homeland to the neighboring countries. Now, with Syria, this will not play much of a role in Saudi Arabia's decision to normalize ties with Israel. The main consideration for Saudi Arabia is the defense pact with the United States. So they have been talking for quite some time about striking a defense pact. And one of the conditions of the defense pact between Riyadh and Washington is for the former to normalize ties with Israel. But now, after the Gaza onslaught, the Saudis are saying, like, it's what Israel has done to the Palestinians there is unacceptable. And even us, we want to normalize ties with Israel. But what the Israelis are saying, basically, that we killed the two-state solution and the Palestinians have to leave. And Trump is saying the same thing. So they took one step back in this normalization process. And even the defense pact with the United States and said, we can strike something more light version of the defense pact. We could strike military deals and security deals, but not a comprehensive defense pact which gives the United States a complete hegemonic status over the region, because Saudi Arabia is the richest country in the region. And Saudi Arabia, if they strike this deal with the US, then the US will sell Saudi Arabia hundreds of billions of dollars worth of products and military equipment, and they will prioritize the supply of this weaponry and products to Saudi Arabia, plus building the Saudis a civil nuclear program. Plus, the Saudis will commit to sideline the Chinese influence from the region. So this is very important for the US, and the Saudis are trying to leverage their diplomatic might and by saying, two-state solution, give a state for the Palestinians, we strike the defense pact. But on Thursday, Donald Trump insisted that he will force Egypt and Jordan to receive hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. He said, we do a lot for them, and they have to receive the Palestinians. Now,
but surely, logistically, financially, Egypt, whatever the desirable political solution for Egypt, and whatever the desirable political situation choice for Jordan, logistically, they can't afford, surely, logistically or in any other way, to receive additional millions of refugees, be they Palestinian or anybody else. I think Jordan's half refugee population anyway.
Yes. Actually, the Israeli side, the Israeli intelligence have issued a document which was leaked later, and the plan is to send 2 million Palestinians to the Sinai to build them tent cities, which Israel and the US and the European Union would finance. And then there is something important that they don't mention in this document, but I can assure you this is true. And I received this from sources here in Germany, that in different European parliaments, there are commissions who discussed the quotas, how many Palestinians they would absorb from Egypt if or when the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians happens to the Sinai. So they want them to go to the Sinai, build them 10 cities, stay there for some time, and then European countries would absorb some of these Palestinian refugees into Europe. And this is, in my opinion, it will create problems for all. It will create problems for the Palestinians, basically. You're uprooting them from their homeland for how many times since 1948. Secondly, this will create problems also for European countries to absorb hundreds of thousands of new refugees from completely different cultural background. And I'm not saying anything about their culture or their religion or anything else, but bringing some, like teleporting someone from some place to another and expecting him to integrate quickly and learn the language and be in the workforce and market. It is a difficult task. Right. And this has led to the rise of many right-wing groups in Europe, something that the people who are proponents for the open door policies are not protesting, but they're the reasons why the rise of the populist groups is obvious nowadays, because there has been no limit or background check or anything. And if there is only one attack per year by a refugee, this will be all amplified, and you will see that everybody is speaking about it, and this gives more credit to the right-wing groups.
When I listen to you lay that out, it's so hard to get what I would regard as a reasonable common sense mind around what you're saying, and I have no reason to doubt what you're saying. You know, on the one hand, we've got here in the UK, for example, we've got a politician like Nigel Farage representing the Reform Party, very energised and speaking very forcefully about dealing with uncontrolled immigration and the arrival on the southern shore of England of all the small boats and all of the rest of it. And all across Europe, you know, there are populist parties that are rising under the heat created by the flames of uncontrolled mass migration. And yet you're talking at the same time about the European countries planning ahead for the arrival of yet more people from elsewhere. Yes. who will only, I mean, with the best will in the world, would only exacerbate the problems that some politicians are promising to fix. You know, such that you look on at it, you know, calmly as far as you can, and you wonder at the extent to which people, be they Muslim, be they extremist or moderate, be they black, white or brown, are just being disrupted and scattered to the four winds and driven to new places, just to keep everyone in a state of permanent anxiety.
Yes.
While goodness knows what other objectives are actually being pursued in the shadows, you know, cast by those flames. Thanks for joining me today. Let me assure you that is only half of the interview with Kevork Almassian. Please stay tuned or come back to us and pick up for part 2 of the conversation with Syrian award-winning journalist Kevork Almassian.